You never opened an account with them. You never chose a password. You may never have visited their website, but they still knew your name, your date of birth, your address, and the number Americans use to prove who they are. Then, in 2017, attackers reached the database. By the time the breach was discovered, the personal information of roughly 147 million people had been exposed. Nearly half of the United States had become part of the same security incident. The company was Equifax, one of the largest consumer reporting agencies in America. Credit bureaus sit behind decisions that shape ordinary life. Their records help lenders decide who can receive a mortgage, a credit card, a car loan, or sometimes an apartment. The consumer often does not create this relationship. Information arrives from banks, lenders, and other institutions, forming a permanent financial identity that follows the person from one application to the next. That made Equifax different from an ordinary online store. A stolen password can be changed, a compromised credit card can be cancelled, but a social security number and date of birth are meant to remain stable for life. The breach did not simply expose access to one account, it exposed the raw material used to impersonate a person across many accounts. The path inside began with a known software vulnerability. In March 2017, the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team warned organizations about a critical flaw in open-source software used to build Java web applications. A free security patch was available. Equifax received the alert and sent instructions to more than 400 employees. Systems using the vulnerable software were supposed to be patched within 48 hours. On paper, the process existed. In reality, one important system remained exposed. According to the Federal Trade Commission, an automated scan was intended to find vulnerable software on the network, but it was not configured well enough to detect the affected component. The unpatched software remained active inside an online consumer dispute portal. That portal was not an isolated brochure page. Consumers used it to challenge information in their credit files and upload supporting documents. It also connected to services involving credit freezes, fraud alerts, and annual credit reports. Internally, parts of the platform dated back decades. The FTC later described company documents that called the technology archaic and antiquated. Attackers found the opening. Once inside the portal, weak separation between systems allowed them to move toward unrelated databases containing far more information. Administrative credentials stored in plain text opened additional doors. A security certificate used to inspect encrypted traffic had expired months earlier, reducing the company's ability to see what was moving through the network. This is how a single missed patch becomes a systemic failure. The vulnerability was the entrance, but the scale of the breach came from everything behind it. An incomplete inventory, a scanner that looked in the wrong places, credentials that were not protected, systems that were not properly segmented, and monitoring that failed to recognize the extraction. In late July, security staff finally noticed suspicious traffic. The portal was blocked, then taken offline, and an outside forensic team began investigating. But the attackers had already reached databases holding the identities of a nation. The numbers are difficult to absorb. Equifax's forensic analysis found that attackers stole approximately 147 million names and dates of birth, about 145 million social security numbers, and roughly 209,000 payment card numbers and expiration dates. The Government Accountability Office reported that personal information belonging to at least 145.5 million individuals had been accessed. For a victim, The danger was not limited to the week the breach became public. Stolen identity data can remain useful for years. It can support fraudulent credit applications, fake tax filings, account takeovers, or convincing social engineering attacks. The person whose information was exposed may need to monitor credit reports, freeze credit files, dispute accounts, and prove that a transaction made in their name was not actually theirs. There was another uncomfortable feature of the story. Most victims had never made a direct choice to give Equifax their information. The credit reporting system had collected it in the background. People were being asked to protect themselves from the loss of data held by a company they could not simply decide to avoid. The legal response took years. In 2019, the Federal Trade Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and states and territories announced a global settlement. Equifax agreed to pay at least $575 million, with the total potentially reaching $700 million. The agreement included money for credit monitoring and reimbursement, payments to states, and a civil penalty to the CFPB. It also required a broader information security program and annual assessments. Money could compensate some costs. It could not make the exposed identifiers secret again. That is why the central lesson is larger than Equifax. Security policies are not security outcomes. A document can demand a patch within 48 hours, but the risk remains if nobody verifies that every affected system was found and fixed. A scanner can produce a clean report while looking in the wrong place. A firewall can protect the edge while one compromised application reaches databases that should have been separated. For consumers, the practical defenses are imperfect but important. A credit freeze can make it harder for criminals to open new accounts. Credit reports should be checked for unfamiliar activity. Unexpected messages that already know personal details should not automatically be trusted, because stolen data can make a scam sound legitimate. Identity information is not proof that the person contacting you is who they claim to be. The Equifax breach was not one dramatic moment. It was a chain of ordinary failures that lined up behind a known vulnerability. A warning was sent, a patch existed, a scan ran, a process appeared to work. Yet one exposed system remained, and behind it sat the permanent identifiers of nearly half a country. The most valuable database was not protected by one perfect wall. It depended on dozens of smaller controls doing their jobs. When enough of them failed together, 147 million people discovered that their identities had been stored inside a system they could not see, could not leave, and could not repair on their own.